For years after a young family vanished in 6 Rivers, a grad team stopped for lunch beside an oak and smells the wrong kind of rot. A probe taps plastic, and the forest gives back a secret to try to keep. From that tap flows a chain of receipts. A cloud-synced photo taken by a stranger, a venom that shouldn't be here, and an industrial tarp dusted with volcanic ash from miles away. 2 answers surface. 1 doesn't. If the forest returned the parents, where did Maya go? The forest kept the light for itself. Under the crowns of 6 Rivers National Forest, the day moved in a dim green hush that made voices sound smaller. A graduate mycology team pushed through sword ferns and huckleberry, following a compass bearing more than a trail. Their plan was simple: finish a transect, eat, then hike out before the fog drifted back in from the coast. They stopped at a small clearing the Redwoods had spared. An old oak had muscled in here years ago, its buttress roots spreading like ribs across the ground. Packs dropped. Someone opened a tin of crackers. Someone else checked the data logger and marked their location in a field notebook. It was quiet, too quiet. One of them joked. No road noise, no voices, only the soft drip of last night's moisture leaving the leaves. The team lead, Mira, walked the edge of the clearing with her camera. She liked to note the odd things you notice only when you're not looking for them. 10 paces from the group, she saw it. A low, amorphous mass pressed against the oak's base, half hidden by fallen leaves. At first her brain said foam. Then it said fungus, and then it said nothing at all. She crouched. The growth was about 3 feet across, mottled in sulfur yellow, chalk white, and streaks of oily black, as if the forest floor had melted and cooled in clumps. The surface was lumpy and porous, like bread pulled apart and left in the rain. Threads ran into the soil where it met the root flare. It looked alive, but not in a way that matched the rest of the clearing. Mira waved the others over. 5 students ringed the oak and fell quiet in the same second. Photos first, wide, mid, detail. They placed a scale card and shot again. Notes followed: diameter, color, texture, moisture, presence of insects, none visible, canopy density, high. Recent fire evidence, none. The air carried a sharp, sour smell like compost left too long in a warm bin. Unusual for this cool, shaded grove. No one used dramatic words. They didn't need to. The facts were enough. Check radius, Mira said. 2 students walked slow circles, heads down, scanning for any trail or human sign. Boot prints, cut twigs, the straight edge of a board under duff. Nothing. The forest around them was unmarked. Even the animal trails were faint and old, traveling where the ground chose, not where people did. They paused and listened. Beyond their own breathing, the clearing stayed still. They agreed on protocol. No digging today. No cutting. They were in permitted research zones, but this wasn't one of their planned sample points. They could document now and return with proper authorization and a plan for minimal disturbance. They flagged 2 trees well off the route line, recorded bearings and distance to the oak, and dropped a GPS pin. On camera, Mira stated the time, the weather, and the team's decision. Before they packed up, Evan, the quiet one who liked tools more than talk, asked to try a non-invasive probe, a thin, flexible soil rod they used to feel for compaction layers before coring. Just at the margin, he said. No deeper than 5 centimeters. Mira waited, then nodded. Edge only. If you meet resistance, stop. Evan slid the probe into the soil where fungus met ground. The first inch went in like damp sand. The second met a soft tug, as though threads held the dirt together. He eased another centimeter and felt something different. Not root, not rock. He adjusted his angle, pressed again, and heard a muted tap through the metal shaft. He froze. The probe balanced in his hand like a needle on glass. Stop, Mira said, already moving closer. She knelt, eyes level with the surface, and looked for any sign of damage. None. She tapped the rod with her fingernail. The sound came back the same, thin, distant, and wrong for soil. She withdrew the probe slowly, wiped it with an alcohol swab, and capped it. They stepped back as a group and reset. No one argued about the plan now. They photographed the exact insertion point and marked it on a sketch map with a small X. They took a short air sample canister reading in case any volatile compounds were present. They logged microclimate, temperature, humidity, light. They labeled a soil swab from the surface only. Everything went into bags, tags facing out, handwriting clear. Tomorrow, Mira said, we file the notice, request a limited excavation permit, and bring the core kit. No assumptions. No hero moves. Heads nodded. The procedure was a comfort. It kept imagination from sprinting ahead of evidence. They ate in a loose circle, food quick and simple, voices low. Someone tried a joke about slime molds being drama queens. It landed barely. When they shouldered their packs, they took one last look at the oak. The mass sat where it had been, colors dulled by shade, edges faint where leaves clung. The smell seemed stronger now that they were leaving. On the way out, the forest returned to its usual sounds, drips, a distant jay, the rough hush of their own steps. No one said grave. No one said body. They said sample, permit, return. But the probe's tap had already moved the find from strange to suspicious in a single thin sound. They marked the clearing on their paper map with a small circle and a date, packed it away, and started the long, careful walk back to the truck. The light between the trees looked the same as when they arrived, but the place did not feel the same. 4 years earlier, the story began with a picture that looked like every other happy trail stop on a summer afternoon. Colin Ashford stood centered, pack straps banding across his chest, a neat beard catching a line of light. Ria Moreno leaned in at his side, a blue tee bright against the soft green under the canopy. Between them, 6-month-old Maya rested in a front carrier, a tiny pink headband set like a flag of ordinary joy. Around them, trunks rose so straight and tall they seemed to leave the frame. The light was the kind that happens only under old growth, soft, filtered, even. The image reached the cloud at midday, not because they had signal where they stood, but because they picked up a bar or two somewhere on the drive out or at a turnout where the trees thinned. The upload left a silent receipt, timestamp, GPS, device ID. When investigators later opened the file, the metadata spoke without flourish. It placed the family in a public grove used by tourists and day hikers. The coordinates weren't secret. The grove had a name printed on park maps. And the photo itself said something else, something the EXIF couldn't. The angle was too square, the framing too clean for a selfie at arm's length. The phone had been handed to a third person. The discovery of that fact set 2 simple goals. First, find the trailhead that matched the location data. Second, find the person who pressed the shutter. Rangers reached the lot in late afternoon. The family's car sat where it should have, backed neatly into a space, windows up, doors locked. There were no scuffs on the paint, no broken glass, no prime marks on the frame. A park brochure and a thermos rode in the cup holders. A folded diaper bag lay on the back seat. The dashboard clock blinked the wrong time the way clocks do when cars sit for days. The vehicle looked undisturbed, like a bookmark left in the middle of a chapter. A search of the lot's permit board confirmed the plate and date. The ranger on scene logged the time, photographed the car from 4 angles, and walked a slow circle, eyes on the ground for anything that didn't belong. Knit fibers, a bottle cap with fresh scuffs, a dropped wipe. The asphalt gave back only dust and a scatter of old needles. The lot sat quiet enough to hear a J announce itself and go. At home, Elena Moreno had waited past the hour the family had promised to check in. Ria's calls usually arrived early, not late. She preferred to put a parent's mind at ease before the day slipped away. When the window passed, Elena tried Ria's phone, then Colin's. Both went to voicemail. She told herself what people tell themselves. Canopy steals signal, batteries die, hikers lose track of time when the light is nice. By morning, reassurance had sharpened into worry. She called a non-emergency line, then the park office. She explained who her daughter was, who her son-in-law was, how carefully they planned. Ria and Colin were not improvisers. Friends described them as outdoorsy but deliberate. the kind who laid out gear the night before and carried more water than a short trail required. Rhea's caution increased after Maya was born. Colin adapted without argument. They chose marked paths, checked weather twice, and sent a location drop when they could. If they changed a plan midday, they said so. All of that lived in Elena's voice when she spoke to the ranger. This isn't their pattern. With the car located, the park set the first layer of response. A ranger pair to walk the Grove loop and fan outward. A board update that flagged the vehicle as connected to a welfare check. A call to the county to place the case on a watch list. Meanwhile, detectives copied the photo to a working drive and zoomed past Smiles to the background. The exact run of fence rails, the angle of a trail placard, the way a particular burl twisted above a bench. Those details narrowed the spot more precisely than GPS could. Then they worked on the photographer. The image was circulated through visitor channels and a quiet post on the park's official feed. If you were asked to take this picture on date, please contact us. It's a common ask in places where strangers trade phones for a moment and carry a family's memory for 10 seconds. 2 days later, a reply reached the ranger inbox from an email abroad. The sender was a traveler who recognized the framing and remembered the couple with a baby in the pink headband. He said they had exchanged a few words about how cool the Grove felt even on a warm day. He had held the phone steady, counted 1, 2, 3, and handed it back. He hadn't seen anyone else hovering nearby. No argument, no odd tension. He watched them adjust the carrier, check a water bottle, and set off down the main trail the way most visitors do, toward a footbridge, past a sign that pointed to another loop and a small overlook. He offered nothing dramatic, because there had been nothing dramatic to offer. The helpful stranger had done the ordinary thing and kept walking. The family had done the ordinary thing and kept walking. That's what made the next part so difficult. The last certain image of the day showed 3 people under trees, mid-smile, exactly where the map said they would be. The witness confirmed their direction. The car waited where they'd left it, showing no story of its own. And then the trail went quiet. The search began the way big searches do, fast, serious, and with a plan that grew by the hour. Rangers closed the trailhead early and turned the parking lot into a small command post. Maps on plywood, a whiteboard for assignments, coolers of water beside stacks of flagging tape. A deputy pinned the last photo of Colin, Rhea, and Maya to the board where everyone could see the reason they were there. The first problem was above their heads. The canopy in 6 Rivers is a roof. Helicopters did a quick pass anyway, but the camera saw only crowns and shadows. Aerials were useless here. Heat signatures never made it through. Drones tried the same and came back with green wallpaper. The work would have to be on the ground, and on the ground visibility is meters, not miles. Hasty teams went first, 2 or 3 people each, good pace, eyes up and down. They took the main loop where the witness had seen the family continue, then the spurs that peel off toward overlooks and small creeks. They called names. They paused to listen in the quiet that follows a shout. It is hard to see anything in a forest that is the same color in every direction. The floor is a sponge of needles laid down by years. Footprints don't last. Even clear tracks from a boot turn soft in an hour, then vanish. Behind the hasty teams came the K-9 units. Handlers explained how scent behaves here. Cool air flows along the ground. Fog drip wets everything at dawn, and corridors under ferns act like slow rivers. Dogs work the trail edges, then the likely rest spots. Logs at knee height, flat stones near the path. Noses caught threads and lost them again, catching and losing like radio stations between hills. One dog led down a damp draw and circled, wagged once at a hollow where mushrooms clustered, and then dropped it. Scent pooled and broke all day. No line held long enough to follow. By afternoon, the map had radiating grids penciled over it like a sunburst. Each ring marked a distance out from the point where the photo had likely been taken. Crews took wedges, moved slow, and planted whistles on lanyards in case they needed to call a line together. A medic team stayed central with a litter in case luck found the family alive and injured. Radios popped with negative and repeating sweep. Negative is part of the job. Too many negatives in a row make a room feel heavy. Back at the board, detectives logged the family's habits for search planning. Day hike kit only. No satellite phone. Standard water, snacks, a small first aid pouch. One soft blanket for the baby. They were not set up to spend a night in the woods, and that sharpened the clock for everyone. If something had gone wrong, it had to be close to the path, close enough to reach before supplies ran out. They checked water next. Teams walked both banks of the creek that crosses the area and the smaller side channels that feed it. They probed the edges with poles where the water runs under log jams. The water ran clear and shallow in most places, brown and deep in a few. Nothing caught. They set sound tests at dusk. One ranger at a ridge calling at intervals, while others listened downslope for voice and echo. The forest answered the same way it always does at night, with small movements and no help. On day 2, a crew swept the informal paths people make without meaning to, shortcuts between benches, social trails that widen a foot of summer and then blend back into brush. If someone had left the main track to soothe a crying child or find a quiet spot, those were the likely exits. They found snack wrappers old enough to crack, a bottle cap with weather in it, and a torn corner of a map that had been there for seasons. Nothing recent. Nothing that told a story you could read. Volunteers joined on day 3 and 4 under ranger supervision. They were briefed the same as the pros. Don't move what you find. Mark it. Call it in. Wait. People want to help. The briefing keeps help from turning into noise. A few hopeful calls came over the radio. A pink thread. A gray strap. But each proved to be forest trash that had traveled on someone else's boot months earlier. Every night the operation reset. New grids. New wedges. The canines tried again at different hours. Dogs make their own weather. A wind shift or temperature drop can turn a bad day into a possible one. They got small hits near a rest area and lost them as the air cooled. The handlers were kind when they said it out loud. This place eats scent. Detectives worked the other end of the problem while boots worked the ground. They ran the couple's bank cards. No hits, phone pings, nothing since the upload window, and nearby cameras on roads in case anyone hitchhiked or got a ride. No matches. They checked hospitals and clinics. They checked shelters. The grid on the map kept growing rings as the administrative grid grew lines. By the end of the first week, the board was almost full. By the end of the second, the teams had walked and re-walked the same rectangles until even the moss felt familiar. You can move a lot of ground with enough people, but a forest like this still holds more corners than a plan can cover. The command post trimmed its hours. The helicopter went back to other work. The radio said, "Stand down for today," more often. No one liked the sentence they had to write on the board, but it was the only honest one available. After 2 weeks, there was zero trace. No clothing, no bottle, no fiber, no note, no sound. The forest had swallowed them, and if it planned to give anything back, it hadn't chosen the time yet. The first good lead arrived with the smell of fresh sawdust where no saw should have been. A ranger following up on unrelated vandalism found a pocket of burl poaching miles from the family's last known grove. Raw scallops cut from redwood flanks, cambium bleeding sap, tracks from a pickup that had backed in at night and left before dawn. It was the kind of scene that made sense as a danger story. If Colin and Rhea had stepped off trail and into an active cut, someone might have decided to solve a problem quickly. Detectives treated the find as if it mattered until it didn't. They mapped every cut in the pocket, measured chainsaw curves, and cast tire impressions that crossed a rutted spur. The operation looked organized and recent. Fresh chips under duff, wedge blocks left in the mud, a cigarette but ground flat beside a stump. They logged the cigarette for DNA and sent the wedges for tool mark comparison. A cut like this feeds a black market that pays in cash and asks no questions. They worked outward from the pocket the way you do when a crime has a center. Lumber brokers are often clean. The buyers here were not. The team cultivated the usual paths. A salvage yard that sometimes forgets to ask for paperwork. A mill that runs late with the doors down. A middleman who used to do business in live-edge furniture that started life as theft. Names surfaced. None were new to the county. Informants said what informants say when heat touches a trade. Work had slowed after a sting last spring. Crews had gone quiet. A few cutters had moved upriver. One name came up twice, a sawyer who bragged in bars and underpaid his help. The timeline fit someone doing something, just not necessarily this thing. Detectives pressed for dates. Nights blurred. Stories bent. Nobody could put a cutter near the public grove the week the family disappeared. Meanwhile, the lab matched the cigarette, but to a man already in the system for timber theft. He was picked up on an unrelated warrant and asked the one question that matters. Do you know anything about a missing family? He shook his head and gave up a fallback site he thought would buy him goodwill. A stash of burls hidden under camo tarps in a dry creek. The stash existed. The burls matched the saw curves from the pocket. None of that drew a line to Colin, Rhea, or Maya. The team ran the vehicle tracks from the poaching site against a region-wide library. Some tread patterns were common to half the trucks in the county. A partial plate from a motion camera on a fire road led to a ranch hand who admitted to running wood for a cousin. He put himself miles away on the relevant days, and his time card, rare for that job, backed him. His cousin had a different alibi, fishing with a friend whose phone, by chance, pinged a tower 60 miles south. The pieces landed in a shape that wasn't the Ashford Moreno case. For a week, the board favored the poaching theory by weight of detail. Even the improbable sometimes wins when nothing else scores. A meeting ended with a dry sentence that no one argued with. They walked into the wrong thing. It sounded clean, and clean theories are tempting. But clean doesn't make true. Detectives pushed again. They asked for dates on every burl sale with cash over 1,000 that summer. The numbers staggered, then stuttered. The peak months didn't match the disappearance. A broker remembered a late-night run the week before, not after. A loader in a coastal yard had a log of when a pallet jack broke, anchoring deliveries against real time. The timeline bent out of alignment. The poachers were thieves, not ghosts. They widened the search around the cut site anyway. 9 units swept the spurs. A dive team put eyes on a culvert pool downhill from the road. Volunteers walked shoulders, looking for toss points. The forest returned what it wanted. Beer cans, a rusted muffler, a belt with no holes stretched. No clothes. No carrier strap. No bottle warmed by a small hand and dropped. When a case runs on friction instead of fuel, you can feel in the room. The burl pocket had looked like a door. It was a wall. The theory evaporated in paperwork and long calls that ended with no. The story that almost fit did what almost fits do. It fell apart at the glue. By fall, the poaching crew took their pleas and fines. The file that could have nested inside the bigger file went to its own shelf. Detectives slid the family's case back where it had lived since the last hasty sweep. Open, monitored, drifting. The photo on the board stayed pinned. The map lost its newest circle. Time passed in the orderly way archives prefer. Then, years later, a park biologist opened an email from a graduate team and clicked a photograph taken at the base of an oak. The image showed a strange fungal mass colored sulfur yellow, white, and black, and the note below it mentioned a smell that didn't match the grove. The next chapter of the case began there, in a lab office far from the trailhead, with a picture that wasn't meant to solve anything and would. They returned the next morning with a plan instead of curiosity. Permits filed, flags and sketch maps in hand. The smell met them before the oak did. Stronger now, not the sweet damp of typical decay, but a sickly, chemical-edged rot that made everyone breathe shallow. Mira read the protocol out loud, so the camera would have it. Surface photos first, shallow trench second. No cutting through the growth. Stop at any sign of manufactured material. They marked a half-moon trench a foot outside the fungal margin and began to peel back the top layer with trowels. Not shovels. Thin scrapes. Each stroke photographed. Each bag labeled. On the third pass, Evan's trowel clicked. Not against rock, but against something that returned sound instead of giving it. He brushed away an inch of loam and fern hairs. Black showed through. Not soil, not root. A corner of industrial tarp sat there, matte, with a faint crosshatch in the weave. He froze, hand off the surface. They stopped. The team stepped back together, as if a string had pulled them. Mira closed the field notebook and called it in on the satellite unit with the coordinates, the bearing to the nearest flag tree, and the access notes from their hike the day before. She used the words the permit required, possible clandestine burial, and then they waited without touching anything else. Help doesn't arrive quickly this deep under a roof of trees. A helicopter can't hover in redwood canopy, so the forensic team staged at a service clearing a ridge away, then hiked in with light kits, camera rigs, PP, clean tarps, evidence tents, lift boards, and a collapsible litter. County detectives followed with a ranger who knew how to read the understory. The scene changed hands the way it should. The students stepped outside a taped perimeter and gave a calm, complete account. What they saw yesterday, what they did today, where the probe met resistance. The lead forensic tech nodded, thanked them, and started from zero as if the story had not been told. Scenes asked for humility. They built a small, neat grid around the trench, then widened it. Photographs. Wide, mid, tight, with scale cards. Notes. Weather, wind, insect activity, low. Canopy density, high. The fungal mass was documented as a byproduct, not the target. When the digging resumed, it was slower than before. The techs undercut outside the tarp's edge, working around it instead of through it, clearing enough soil to slide a hand under without disturbing the center. More black appeared as the soil came away. Multiple layers, smooth and folded, the seams pressed flat like someone had tried to seal air out and everything else in. No one cut the plastic. They teased an edge free, just enough to confirm what the students had found. Not a scrap blown in by wind, but a bundle, intentional and tight. Chain of custody tags were filled before the bundle moved. A clean tarp was laid nearby to stage any bagging. Gloves were checked. A lift board went in under one side, and then another, webbing belts threaded and tightened. With 4 hands at the corners and 1 person calling the count, they raised the bundle intact, slid it to the board, then into the waiting litter. The soil cavity was photographed again. Loose edges of the fungal mat were left undisturbed. Only a limited field check followed. No unwrapping, no exposure. The lead tech palpated the exterior to confirm dimensions and general shape. A corner of the outermost layer was peeled back an inch to identify contents for the medical examiner's office. Human remains, adult, male by preliminary assessment. That was as far as it went on the forest floor. The tarp was resealed and double-wrapped in clean plastic. The litter straps buckled. The team walked the bundle out the way it had come in. Slow, steady, with a ranger moving ahead to clear branches and call footing on the steeper section. At the ridge road, an unmarked SUV took the load the rest of the way to the ME's office. Back at the oak, the ground was leveled, and a simple stake was set at the grave center with a tag that matched the evidence log. The students stayed until their statements were recorded. Their gear went into bags for later wipe down, because transfer is a detail prosecutors ask about even when everyone did everything right. When the last signature dried, the clearing felt larger by an inch. The smell had less source to cling to now, but it didn't leave. In town, the intake was quiet. The medical examiner photographed the bundle before any cut. Layers came off in sequence, each folded and bagged separately. The industrial tarp was logged on its own for later lab work. Fiber type, residue, particulates. Inside, skeletal elements lay with fragments of clothing and the simple metal of a belt buckle. There was nothing anyone in the room needed to say out loud. Identification didn't wait for a full workup. Dental records can answer fast when a case has lived in a cabinet for years. A forensic odontologist compared premolar and molar features to the file on Colin Ashford. The match was clear. He was home, on paper. The call went to the detective sergeant, and then to the ranger who had been on the first day of the search, and then to Elena after a pause long enough to rehearse a kindness that never feels like enough. Back at the board, a new question sat under the old photo and pressed harder than any celebration could. The burial held Colin. There was no Rhea, no Maya. The examination began with what wasn't there. No fractures that shout accident. No clean holes that say gun. No knife nicks in ribs or vertebrae. Colin Ashford's bones told a quiet story. Aligned, largely intact, weathered by time rather than trauma. The medical examiner logged it in calm phrases. No obvious blunt or penetrative injury. Cause of death. Undetermined, pending additional studies. Undetermined isn't an ending. It's a hallway. The me kept walking. Because the remains had been wrapped in industrial tarp and sealed, the body's breakdown had happened inside a kind of low-oxygen container. That detail mattered. Fluids had pooled and then stayed put. Trace chemistry that the forest would normally wash away was trapped. The me ordered special toxicology, not the routine blood screens that make sense in fresh cases, but tests that pull clues from what time leaves behind. 2 samples went out under sealed chain of custody. A bone marrow scraping from a major long bone, where certain compounds can lodge. A vial of decomposition fluid recovered from the folds of the tarp. Dark, concentrated, unpleasant to think about, but valuable to measure. The lab brief spelled out the ask, scanned for venom-associated compounds alongside the usual environmental and pharmaceutical markers. It was a long shot. The staff had seen it work in rare cases. Binding proteins and enzymes sometimes leave stable fragments that can still be detected years later. While those tests ran, the ME's team finished the skeletal survey. The hyoid bone, often checked in strangulation, was intact. No wrist or ankle changes to suggest long-term restraints. Clothing fragments aligned with day hike wear. Pocket contents were ordinary. A flattened receipt no longer readable. A key ring without a car fob. Grit and fibers that would go to trace. Nothing in that tray made the room lean forward. The toxicology report did. The first page was all numbers, peaks, and retention times. The summary translated the spikes into meaning. Compounds consistent with rattlesnake venom were present, at levels concentrated enough to indicate envenomation shortly before death. The lab highlighted molecular fingerprints commonly tied to North American pit viper venom, certain metalloproteinase and phospholipase signatures that, even in fragments, are distinct. Both the bone marrow sample and the trapped fluids hit the same notes. No drama in the ME's voice, only the weight of a fact. This supports death by venom. The room didn't celebrate. It recalculated. A snake bite in this region is possible. The county sees a handful a year, but here, under the deep shade of redwoods, it felt wrong. The detectives asked for context, and the me called people who count scales for a living. 2 herpetologists weighed in. Both said the same thing in different sentences. Rattlesnakes do live in the North Coast ranges, most commonly the northern Pacific species. They favor drier, warmer edges, oak savanna, rocky slopes, log clearings, south-facing breaks where sun finds the ground. In heavy, cool redwood shade, encounters drop. Not impossible, one said, but unlikely unless you're near a transition zone. The other added that late summer heat can push snakes to roam, and humans can wander into edge habitat without realizing it. An oak and a redwood stand, like the one by the grave, is exactly the kind of edge where 2 worlds meet. The detectives turned back to what a bite would look like from a timeline perspective. Symptoms can escalate fast: pain, swelling, disorientation. Without anti-venom and with no cell service, a bad bite can be lethal in hours. The cause might now be explained. The choices after or not. The tarp raised its hand again. Someone had access to heavy, industrial-grade cover, folded it deliberately, and dug a grave deep enough to hide it. That isn't the work of a panicked spouse alone on a trail with a baby. And if Rhea had been forced into a desperate decision, where would she have found that tarp in the middle of the forest? How would she have buried a grown man and carried Maya out, then vanished without leaving a single trace? The facts on the board refused that story. The lab added one more careful line. Environmental contamination as a source for the venom signal was unlikely. The compounds were inside bone pore spaces and concentrated in sealed fluids, not dusted on from outside. The team repeated the controls to be sure. The numbers held. So the case's spine changed shape. The early theories, lost hikers, accidental fall, wrong place/wrong time with poachers, kept their folders but lost their place at the front. A bite likely took Colin's life. A person then took control of the scene. Detectives sketched both halves on a legal pad. Natural hazard, venom. Human choices, tarp, transport, burial, silence. One ranger pointed at the oak on the map. Edge habitat, she said, thinking like a biologist. A detective tapped the road layer nearby, the kind of unmaintained spur an old truck might know. The two taps were close together. It made a horrible kind of sense. Back in evidence, the tarp cuts were bagged for trace, soil grains ground into the fibers, oils, any hint of where it had lived before the forest. The hope was that the plastic would carry a return address in particles too small to see. The me closed his report with a sentence that moved the file from mystery toward plan. Find who handled him after he died. The tarp went to the lab the way money goes to audit, under bright lights, with every fold accounted for. Photographs first, then a clean sectioning, so each layer could keep its own story. If venom explained how Colin died, the tarp might explain who touched him after. Under the scanning electron microscope, the weave looked like a canyon of ridges and valleys. In those valleys, the analyst found the first receipt, microscopic mineral dust that didn't match the gravesite. A quick elemental scan lit up for silicates and iron. Normal enough, but a second set of grains carried a different signature, a distinctive volcanic ash mix rich in glassy shards and trace elements that read like a fingerprint. The tech pulled a control core from soil taken a meter beyond the grave. It lacked that ash entirely. Whatever clung to the tarp had ridden in from somewhere else. They moved to residue. Swabs from the outer folds went through GCMS. The chromatogram lined up with long-chain hydrocarbons and stabilizers common to fuel, but not fresh. The pattern showed oxidation products that build up when spills age on metal. The lab's note called it what it was: diesel-associated residue, weathered. Not the kind you get from an accidental splash last week. The kind you get from a tarp that spent time near a tank or old machinery. Next was the tarp itself. A sliver of the plastic went under FTIR spectroscopy, and then DSC. The polymer wasn't the flimsy blue polyethylene you find in camping aisles. It was a UV-resistant, industrial-grade laminate designed to sit in sun and weather without chalking, a product sold to farms, mills, and construction yards. The seam tape composition matched commercial rolls used to seal heavy covers. Whoever wrapped Colin had access to more than a day hiker's kit. They had inventory. The lab bundled its findings into plain sentences detectives could pin to the board. Volcanic ash/dust embedded in tarp fibers not present at the grave. Aged diesel residue consistent with storage near fuel or heavy equipment. Industrial UV-stable tarp laminate, atypical for recreational use. If a forest hides, a supply chain points. The team split the work three ways. Vector 1, geology. A GIS analyst pulled state layers for volcanic deposits, pockets of ash-influenced soils scattered through the county. The map lit up in small islands inland, mostly on old cinder cones and wind-blown ash beds, not under redwood shade. The layer went translucent and sat on the master map. Vector 2, diesel. They queried property records and past inspections for on-site fuel. Ranches with above-ground tanks, logging yards, small mills, and off-grid homesteads using generators. Fire prevention reports, when available, added notes about storage conditions, exposed tank, secondary containment, staining. That layer joined the first. Vector 3, tarp distribution. Procurement traced the industrial laminate through wholesalers. There weren't many. One regional supplier moved most of the local stock to rural outlets, AG stores, and equipment yards. They pulled invoices for the past 5 years and filtered by roll width and seam tape matching the lab sample. Addresses dotted the map like a third constellation. The detective sergeant set 3 monitors side by side and made the layers dance. Ash, diesel, tarp, clicking them on and off until intersections stayed put. Most dots lived alone. A few touched 2 layers. One cluster handled all 3. It sat 8 miles from the grave, tucked at the end of an unmaintained spur the maps showed as a dashed line, then as nothing. The geology layer marked it with a small orange patch of ash-derived soil. Fire notes from 2 summers ago flagged an old diesel tank and signs of seep on a site visit that ended with a warning and a promise to fix it. Purchase records showed the exact tarp laminate, same width, same vendor, sold to a cash customer using a handwritten name and a P.O. box that belonged to a shuttered business. The room got quiet in the useful way. The ranger who knew the back roads leaned over the map and traced the spur with a finger. "Rough," she said, "but it goes." A younger detective checked the distance against a truck's likely speed on that surface at night. It fit, far enough to feel hidden, close enough to lift a wrapped body without burning a day. They didn't rush. They validated. A second geologist confirmed the ash pocket with a separate dataset. The lab reran the FDR against a different supplier's library, same polymer match. Procurement called the tarp wholesaler and learned that only 3 local outlets carried that roll at that time. 2 were in towns on paved roads. One was a feed and equipment shop that served the end of the spur roads and accepted cash. The sale date sat 3 months after the family vanished, a detail that didn't hurt the theory. Stock moves slow in winter. Rolls last years. Surveillance options were thin this far out. The spur had no cameras, and the nearest cell tower painted the area with a weak, ambiguous cone. But the overlap map didn't need a camera. It needed a plan. They pulled parcel data. The lot at the end belonged to a name that had never crossed the original case file, but had lived in other reports. A man who kept to himself, paid taxes late, and had once told a code inspector to leave and not come back. The inspector had left. The note had stayed. The search team started a list. Approach routes, safe staging, medical, K9, warrant language. The map that had been a scatter of points now felt like a path. The spur road wasn't really a road, just 2 ruts that remembered where trucks had passed when the ground was drier. Blackberry canes leaned in. Alder shoots tried to erase the center line. The ranger leading the way called out washouts and low branches, and the convoy crawled until the trees opened on a clearing that looked built by stubbornness. A homestead stitched together from seasons, scrap, and want. 2 sheds, a lean-to, a narrow cabin with a tin roof patched in squares. The parcel record said Virgil Crowder, 58, owner-occupant, no dependents, paid taxes in lumps when letters got serious. Old notes mentioned a temper around inspectors and a habit of letting things rust into place rather than fix them. From the clearing edge, the place matched the file, solitary, functional, guarded by nothing but distance. They didn't arrive with badges forward. The first contact was a pretext visit, standard in high fire season. 2 officials in county jackets asking about defensible space and fuel storage. The script was ordinary. Walk the perimeter, point out ladder fuels, note any hazards, hand over checklist. Crowder met them on the porch, jaw set, arms folded, saying very little. His eyes moved faster than his words. The officials kept their tone even, their pace slow. The details they needed were in plain view. By the main shed, 3 rolls of black tarp leaned against the wall, taped in the same pattern the lab had diagrammed. A cutter hung beside them, blade nicked, handle sticky with dust. Near the second outbuilding sat an above-ground diesel tank on a low crib of timbers, paint chalked, runoff stains feathered into the soil below. The ground itself had that faintly ashy cast the geologist had circled on the map, a volcanic tint that didn't belong under coastal redwoods. They finished the checklist, marking trees too close to eaves, brush under windows, and thanked him for his time. Crowder grunted something that could have been goodbye. As the county truck rolled back down the spur, a detective in the passenger seat said the quiet part. "We've seen enough. You don't serve warrants this far out without planning." Over the next 48 hours, surveillance sat where the road bends and watched the ridge line. No departing vehicles. No visitors. The power line to the cabin sagged under moss, and a small generator coughed to life in the evenings. All signs that Virgil lived alone. A second team ran the warrant language 3 times to make sure it covered structures, vehicles, containers, and subsurface spaces. The judge signed before midnight. They chose a dawn entry. Fog hung low in the trees, muffling sound. The team split. One element to the door, one to the sheds, one to the back to keep anyone from fading into brush. A loud knock, the call of sheriff's office, warrant, the beat that feels longer than it is, then a second knock. Crowder opened the door in work pants and a flannel, eyes bleak but unsurprised. He didn't resist. They cuffed him, noted the time, and sat him on the porch with a deputy and a blanket against the cold. The property processing began with habits that make reports easy to read later. Photographs before hands, hands before boxes, boxes before bags. In the shed, an evidence tech measured the rolls of tarp, width and core, and compared the seam tape to the lab photos. It matched, same laminate sheen, same tape texture. A field kit swabbed the tank's base. The quick test turned the color it turns for diesel. Soil samples went into vials from 3 locations: the drip line, the vehicle path, the garden bed, in case the volcanic signature needed confirmation. On a workbench lay receipts, generator parts, fencing staples, and an invoice from a rural supply store that sat on the map's tarp distribution layer. Cash purchase, handwritten, 3 months after the family vanished. Enough to inch theory toward pattern. Inside the cabin, the clutter had settled into strata, magazines in one corner, tool catalogs in another, canned goods stacked to the ceiling on rough shelves. A single chair by a narrow window, a wood stove blackened from years of use. No photographs on the walls, no other names on any notes. The kitchen smelled like old coffee and kerosene. The bathroom was hardly a room at all. They moved slowly, lifting and replacing, logging each drawer before it opened. A bedroom held a frame with no mattress and a pile of blankets that looked more like insulation than bedding. The closet gave up boots, jackets, and a hat with a salt ring. Nothing loud in the first hour, only the quiet of a life that didn't invite company. Then a deputy in the kitchen noticed what older houses volunteer if you stare long enough. The floorboards along one wall ran straight and tight, old lumber seasoned into place. A rectangular patch, though, didn't. Its boards sat a hair proud. The nail heads were new silver against surrounding brown. The spacing was just off, a carpenter's miss or a later fix. He knelt and ran his fingers along the seam. The edge gave the smallest lift, then settled. The deputy called for the sergeant, and the room drew closer by inches. Photos from 3 angles. A tape measure. A magnet swept along the cracks, twitched, and stuck where metal hid below. The sergeant nodded once. Log the find. Document the fasteners. We're going to take it up. They cleared the countertops, set down a clean tarp, and laid out tools that wouldn't shatter old wood. Each screw came out in order and went into its own cup, labeled. The last fastener lifted with a soft squeal. The panel rocked when the deputy pressed. He slid a flat bar under the edge and raised it a few inches, enough to see a blackness that wasn't just shadow. A cooler breath of air spilled into the kitchen, cold, damp, carrying a smell the team recognized from the clearing by the oak, muted but familiar. They set the panel aside and aimed lights into the gap. The beam found rough earth and the top rungs of a narrow ladder, disappearing into access below. Cold air rose from the opening like a warning. It smelled of mildew and earth left wet too long, and underneath that, the faint, flat note the team already knew from the oak, the odor of long-closed decay. Lights went on. A deputy tested the rungs with a boot heel, then descended into the root cellar, calling out each step until his voice settled in the small space below. The cellar was no more than a room scraped out of ground. Rough shelves ran along 2 walls, crowded with jars gone cloudy and tools gone brown. The ceiling hovered low enough to make backs round. On the dirt floor, the beam picked out a drift of old burlap sacks, the weave rotted to lace, and a patchwork of disturbed soil that didn't match the rest of the tamp surface. Everything slowed. Photos first, wide, mid, detail, then markers for the corners and a quick sketch with measurements. A forensic tech misted the air with an indicator to catch stray fibers in the cone of light and watch the dust settle. When the camera stopped, gloved hands moved the burlap by inches, not feet, folding each piece into clean bags. Beneath the last layer, the ground gave a familiar shape. They did not touch it. They brushed back only enough soil to confirm what the outline already said. Skeletal remains, curled by time and space, the bones lying where the body would have settled. Near the torso, clothing fragments held their color past reason. Threads of a blue fabric that matched the description in the missing persons file, the same tone seen in the last photo. A small metal zipper pull with enamel worn away. A hair tie turned brittle. The room tightened without anyone moving. The sergeant logged the find out loud, so the record would carry steady. Human remains, probable adult female, associated materials consistent with Ria Moreno. No one used names beyond that. Names come later, after the dentist. They widened the perimeter within the little they had. A tech dusted the ladder's upper rungs. Trace marks put recent use at only the top two, suggesting the panel had been opened from above more than climbed through. On the dirt by the south wall, two shallow post holes showed where something had once been staked. Nearby, a length of cordage lay flattened under soil, the fibers dark and stiff. They photographed and bagged it. On a shelf, a bent metal ring and buckle lay beside a pile of jar lids. None of it screamed, but together it spoke, restraint. They set a small screen and sieved soil by the handful, catching buttons, threads, and the stubborn grit of a place that had been worked twice. Once to store vegetables, once to store a secret. In the back corner, behind a crate of jars sealed decades ago, a tech found a soft bag with mildew along the seams. Inside lay a blue waste pack, the same model listed in the report, still holding a flattened wallet and an ID card gone soft at the edges. Tucked beneath it were a bundle of baby clothes, tiny snaps still bright, and a handcrafted blanket woven in a style no one in the family recognized. Colors and pattern out of place in this room, too deliberate to be random. They documented each item separately, then photographed them together next to a scale and tag. The blanket's fibers would go to lab. The weave might say where it was made. The baby clothes would go to DNA. The waste pack would go to latent prints, even if time had eaten most of what hands had left. When the skeletal lift began, it was done in stages. Each section was mapped, each bone nested in foam and labeled. The hyoid, just a sliver of bone of the throat, was recovered intact enough to study and given its own bag. The medical examiner's office would look closely. In too many cases, that fragile piece answers the worst question. The team made a second pass with brushes to collect microtrace from the immediate area. Hair fragments, fibers, a speck of paint here, a grit of something there. Everything went into envelopes with lines filled clear enough for a jury to read. Upstairs, the cabin felt more silent now that the ground had spoken. A deputy signed a property receipt for the items that would travel to the lab. Another updated the board by the door with clean block letters. Remains recovered. Female, pending dental. Associated items. Waste pack, blue. Infant clothing, woven blanket, unknown origin. Evidence of restraint. At the medical examiner's intake, photographs were taken under better light. A forensic odontologist compared the molar patterns from the cellar to Ria's dental chart. It did not take the hour anyone had prepared for. The match was definite. Back at the homestead, the team did the careful, unglamorous work that keeps stories from slipping. Sweeping logs, closing evidence tents, covering the opening so the weather wouldn't turn the cellar into something else before the next visit. The cold air from below was already losing its edge, the way a room does when its secret has been told. They had two answers now. Colin lay beneath the oak. Ria lay beneath the house. The facts drew a line through time, clean enough to see, mean enough to carry. The blanket, the clothes, the waste pack made that line worse and better at once. Maya had been here. The room did not say where she went. They brought Virgil Crowder into a plain room. Gray walls, two chairs, a table that wobbled unless you set your hand on one corner. A recorder blinked. A detective read him his rights in a calm voice and slid a waiver across. Virgil stared at the paper, then signed with a short, hard stroke. He sat back, arms loose, jaw set. The detective did not start with questions. He started with facts. He laid out an evidence folder and opened it piece by piece, each item placed where Virgil could see it and the camera could, too. First, photos of the tarp, the weave, the seam tape, the lab notes. Industrial UV laminate, the detective said. Not a camping tarp. Same width, and tape as the rolls by your shed. Sold through a single regional supplier. Next, microscope stills of mineral dust embedded in the tarp fibers. Volcanic ash mix, he said. Not found at the grave. Found on your property. A printout followed. GCMS results. Weathered diesel residue, he read. Matches storage by an old above-ground tank. He did not look up when he said it. He kept his finger on the line. Then the parcel map, marked with 3 layers. Ash pocket, diesel tank, tar purchases. The red box around Virgil's parcel sat where all 3 overlapped. After that came the photos from the cabin, the rolls of tarp, the tank, and, finally, the cellar. The square cut in the kitchen floor. The ladder. The disturbed soil. The items recovered. A blue waste pack, baby clothes, a handcrafted blanket. And 2 pages later, the lab's quick dental confirmations. Colin Ashford from the grave at the Oak. Rhea Moreno from the cellar. Virgil's face did not change much. He watched the papers the way a man watches whether he can't stop. We're going to ask you about the sequence, the detective said. You can help us be exact. Virgil started with what people start with when they don't see a way through. You're wrong, he said. It's not mine. I don't know anything about that. The detective did not argue. He turned a photo, so it faced Virgil more squarely and waited. Silence does work that words can't. Virgil tried again. People come out there. I can't keep them off. Could be anyone. The detective slid over a second sheet, the warrant inventory with dates and times, and the match notes for the tarp. It isn't anyone, he said. It's here. The stillness stretched. Then something in Virgil's shoulders loosened. He looked past the detective to the blank wall and spoke without heat. She came in the dark, he said, banging on the door, crying, holding a baby. He told it in short pieces, as if each part needed to be put on the table before he could touch the next. Rhea had reached the homestead after midnight. Maya strapped to her chest, clothes damp, voice hoarse from calling. She said Colin had been bitten by a snake. She said he needed help. Virgil grabbed a light and followed her through tight trees and duff. They found Colin near an oak, still and swollen in ways that told their own story. He was gone, Virgil said. No pulse. I checked. He stopped there for a long breath and then moved on. He said he should have called it in. He didn't. He said he had been drinking. He said the night was very quiet and the road was very far, and the thought of other people coming to his place felt like a threat he couldn't name. He led Rhea and the baby back to the cabin. He admitted what happened next in a voice that had no edges. He kept them there. He heard her. He said it the way a man speaks a word he knows will not land soft no matter how quietly he says it. He did not give details. The detective did not ask for them. The record did not need them. The next day, he said, he panicked. He told himself there was no way to undo what he had done. He could not let Rhea leave and tell anyone. In the cellar, he killed her. He used the word strangled without lifting his eyes. He covered the body beneath the floor. Then he returned to the oak. He took one of his industrial tarps, wrapped Colin, folded the seams tight, and dug a grave off the roots. He believed the forest would keep what he left there. He said it had for a long time. He talked about hours and tools, and the way a shovel sounds when it hits soil that hasn't been moved in years. He spoke about carrying the weight alone and how heavy the quiet felt when it was done. The detective let the story sit. He wrote the time in the margin. Then he asked the only question that had not been answered. Where is Maya? Virgil's gaze broke from the wall. He said he couldn't do to a baby what he had done to her mother. He said he drove south within days. He said he crossed the border and left the child at a rural orphanage under a false name. He said he didn't go back. He said he never checked. Which town? The detective asked. Virgil gave a name and a road that might have been a road once. He gave an old map's worth of directions. The recorder kept blinking. The detective closed the folder. He repeated back what he'd heard in clean lines to be sure the record held. The tarp match, the soil and diesel, the cellar, the 2 bodies, the sequence. Virgil nodded once, not in agreement, but in the way a person nods at a weight he can't lift again. They split the confession into tasks. One team took the timeline south. Another kept building the case that would stand no matter what they found across a border. The southbound team started with paper. A glove box envelope for Virgil's truck held 2 old fuel receipts, one on a highway east of the state line, one outside San Diego, dated within a week of the disappearance. A motel register copy surfaced in a box in his shed, handwritten, matching his name and plate. None of this proved the story about a baby. It proved movement. They pulled automatic license plate reads from toll cameras where they exist and traffic cameras where they don't. The truck appeared on a county road the morning after the cellar date. Then again 2 days later on a desert freeway most people used to go south fast. Border records from that month, slow to retrieve, stubborn to read, eventually produced a match for his plate exiting the country and a human-readable note on the return. Same plate, same driver, no passenger visible. It was thin, but it was a thread. Financials added small anchors. Virgil rarely used cards, but a tired debit trail showed 2 ATM withdrawals in border towns and a cashier's receipt from a feed store hundreds of miles away with his signature flat across the bottom. Phone records were mostly silent. He carried a basic handset that did little more than ring. A few tower hits traced the line of interstates and then stopped near the crossing. After that, the dark. The item that felt most like a bridge, if a fragile one, was the blanket from the cellar. Textile experts at a university lab examined the weave under light and put the design in a family of patterns common to the Oaxaca valleys. The fiber content and dyes lined up with small workshop production rather than factory stock. The blanket could have been bought anywhere. It almost certainly came from there. It did not make the claim true. It made it possible. With that, an international request went out. A careful description of an infant girl left without lawful records at a rural orphanage, mid-2013, with an adult male who gave a false family story. The request carried photos of Rhea and Colin, a growth chart extrapolating outward from 6 months, and the blanket's images. It went to consular channels and social services, then out to a handful of NGOs that understand how paperwork breaks in places where buildings flood and ledgers mold. Pieces came back, just not the piece anyone wanted. A regional office confirmed 2 orphanage closures after storms that ruined paper archives. A nonprofit sent word that a manager changed at one home in 2014 and took records with him to a second site that later shut down. A clerk in a town no one on the team had visited mailed a scan page from a ledger listing Hijjas Sendado's daughter without data, received the right year, but with an age that could fit 2 different children. The entry had no photo. It had no footprint stamp. It had a note that the child was later transferred. Detectives pushed deeper. They asked for immunization logs, any clinic visits, any baptism records, any school enrollments years later that matched a birth date window. Names shifted, spellings changed, dates were approximate. A lead would brighten, then dim. In one case, a girl adopted to a coastal family matched everything, but a birthmark Elena remembered. In another, a photo felt right for 2 days until a court file proved the child had entered care a year too late to be Maya. Back home, the other team worked the file that had to survive alone. The tarp match, the volcanic soil and the fibers, the diesel residue pattern, the industrial laminate purchase, the parcel overlap, the cellar, the dental IDs, the toxicology for venom, the admissions on tape. All of it made a structure that did not lean on hope or rumor. The charging document stacked counts: murder for Rhea, kidnapping, sexual assault, improper disposal of a body, and a suite of lesser offenses that would matter if the greater one somehow didn't. Virgil met twice with his public defender, saw the photos again under fluorescent lighting, and signed the paper that ends trials before they start. He pleaded guilty. In a courtroom the size of a school gym, with microphones that rang when someone stood too close, the judge read the sentence and then read it again, so the words would carry. Life without parole. Elena sat very straight. She did not speak. When asked if she wanted to address the court, she shook her head once. Not a refusal, just a choice to keep whatever word she had for a place that wasn't public. After sentencing, the The box work continued because casework rarely stops at a gavel. The international request stayed open, updated with a composite that aged a 6-month-old into a 4-year-old with 2 sets of eyes to pick from. Rhea's shape, Colin's color. A standing note flagged any contact from the valley towns the blanket suggested. DNA kits were readied for relatives who might one day swab a child who doesn't know why she feels like family. Detectives wrote the last paragraph of the closeout memo the way they write when they wish they didn't have to. The case is solved as to the deaths of Colin Ashford and Rhea Moreno. The claim regarding Maya remains unconfirmed. Lead status. Active. International assistance. The board in the squad room lost most of its pins. It kept one photo and a single sentence under it, so no one could forget what still mattered. The sentence came in a room with bad acoustics and careful words. Life without parole. No appeal about evidence. No final speech. A clerk stamped the file. The deputies led Virgil Crowder away. What the law could do, it had done. Paper moved next. The judge signed a forfeiture order. The homestead and the sheds, everything fixed to the parcel, passed to the county. A civil team logged the contents in a quiet inventory. Tools, fuel tank, scrap. The cabin was boarded to hold the scene until cleanup. Later, the tank would be drained and tagged, the stained soil marked for removal. The rolls of tarp went to evidence long-term. The rest was destined for auction or the dump. No one hurried. A place built slowly comes apart the same way. Back at headquarters, the case file turned into boxes. Tabs labeled scene, tarp, toxicology, cellar, interview. Photos and reports slid into sleeves. A property receipt thick as a book sat on top. On the spine of each banker's box, the sergeant wrote the case number and 3 names in clean block letters. The boxes closed with the flat rip of tape that means a story, on paper, is done. But not everything can be taped shut. Rangers went back to the 2 anchors of the case, the oak and the cabin, to finish what work remained. At the oak, the grave stake came up and the ground was tamped level. A botanist noted for the record what the students had guessed. The fungal mass was opportunistic, a bloom fed by what the tarp kept in. With the source removed, the colors dulled. The mat would dry and peel and fold back into the soil. The forest would reclaim the small arc that had been cut out of its quiet. At the cabin, a contractor braced the kitchen opening and capped the ladder into the cellar with a bolted hatch, so weather and scavengers couldn't make it hazard. A note went to building code about demolition. A second note went to victim services about what, if anything, should be salvaged for Elena Moreno. Not because she needed things from that place, but because it is kinder to ask. Elena did not want the visit to be public. The detective who had made the hardest phone call made this one too. They met at a pullout where sword ferns move like water when wind slips through. Elena stood with a small paper bag in her hand, the kind gift shops use for fragile items. She took out a soft toy, a worn plush rabbit with one ear stitched twice, and set it on a flat stump. She touched the ear with a fingertip and left it there. No camera recorded it. The forest did. The investigator gave her a short update that didn't pretend certainty. The international note remained active. A description of a child who might be Maya, placed without record in 2013 to 2014 in the region Virgil had named. The request lived in consular inboxes, in social service circulars, and with NGOs that move between towns where ledgers are kept in pen. A DNA kit was ready if a call ever came about a girl who didn't fit her papers. Elena nodded once. She said she kept her phone charged at night. Inside the lab, a few items stayed in the long-holed drawer. The blanket from the cellar, the zipper pull, the cordage, a plastic strip from the tarp seam. Some things wait for new tests that haven't been invented yet. Evidence technicians are patient by profession. The squad room shifted back to its normal sounds. New cases took the open slots on the whiteboard. The old case sat on a lower shelf where solved files go. Still, one interagency alert stayed pinned above the printer, updated once a quarter with the same careful language and a quietly urgent header. It wasn't performative. It was a reminder to look twice when a tip came in with the right year and the right distance, and a child whose eyes looked like both her parents at once. The grad students who had stopped for lunch at an oak returned to classes and fieldwork. Their report on unusual fungal blooms over nutrient sources made a line in a journal that almost no one outside their circle would read. They didn't push the story. They didn't need to. They had done what they were trained to do. Notice, document, call it in. What remains after a case like this is a set of facts and a set of rooms. The facts are hard and hold their shape. Colin died of venom. He was wrapped and buried by a man who chose silence. Ria was murdered and hidden under a floor. The man who did both will die in prison. The rooms are where people put what facts can't carry. A toy on a stump, a phone on a charger, a name on a calendar box every year. On the drive out from the grove, the road tilted to show the coast, and then turned back into trees. The detective rolled down a window and let the air change temperature on his arm. He thought about how many searches end with no answers at all. This one had 2. It should have had 3. The file won't reopen without a reason, but the note will keep traveling. It will pass across desks and inboxes until one day someone sees a date, a face, a blanket pattern, a detail that doesn't fit, and decides to send a message back. The forest doesn't speak, but it does return things at its own pace. It gave back 2. The third is a sentence that isn't finished. The forest kept 2 secrets and let one go. The rest is still listening. One case closed. One question open. Subscribe to Alibi Stories and press the bell so you don't miss the next reveal. Share your theory below.